Hi everyone, I'm Abigail, this is James, and welcome to another Two Kids interview.
Today we are joined by award-winning author Joan Galat.
Ms. Galat has written many nonfiction books, including the Dot to Dot in the Sky books.
Erupt, Solve This, Dark Matters, Mortimer, Rat Race to Space, plus many more.
Also, coming in February is her book, Make Your Mark, Make a Difference, a kid's guide to standing up for people, animals, and the planet.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's my pleasure to join you.
You have written a number of books about space, which is the final frontier.
Only a handful of people have been out there, and nobody has gotten very far out there yet.
And it seems that even in our lifetimes, nobody will.
Yet people are so interested in outer space. Why do you think that is?
I think it's hard not to look up at the night sky and wonder what's out there. That's what made me want to write about outer space, was spending time outside, laying on my back on the grass, looking up at the night sky and trying to tell the difference between stars and planets and watching the northern lights. And it just fills me with such a sense of awe. I think that other people feel that too when we look up and we wonder what's out there. And most of us can just look up from, here from Earth. So that's what we do.
When it comes to nonfiction books about science, there are so many topics to choose from. How do you decide what topics you want to write about?
Well, that's a tricky one because I'm a very curious person and I always want to know why, and I want to know how things work. And so a lot of my ideas come to me when I read things and I want to know more and explore more. And I also get ideas when I spend outside at night looking at the night sky, or I spend time in nature. So I'm curious about just about everything. And I started with the Dot to Dot in the Sky series that you mentioned, with a book called Stories in the Stars, which I think I saw you were holding there. It's because I wanted to show readers how to find the constellations. When I was your age, I'd look up at the night sky and I would try and find the pictures shaped out of stars that people call constellations. And I was able to find the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper and some of the others, but I was never sure with the other ones if I was actually finding the right stars. If you turn your head enough ways, you can see constellations everywhere. And so I wanted to make it easier. And I came up with the idea that if you could connect the dots in the night sky, then you could find the constellations by jumping from one group to the next. So that's what I show how to do in those books. And so starting with the stars, it was natural then to go on to the planets and to go on to the moon and to go explore further into the zodiac constellations and the northern lights. So one thing just kept leading to another. And that's why I've written about so many different aspects of space.
How much time do you have to spend doing research writing your books?
I spend a lot of time researching. Sometimes authors find it's easier to research than to write. It's easier to look things up than to figure out how to put things in my own words. And so it's easy to get lost in the research. But if I'm retelling a myth or story, I want to find 3 different versions of it before I put it in my own words. So in that case, I would need to go to the library. I would need to look in bookstores. I would need to go online and be very careful about what sources I pick. I'm very careful about that. And but I also have the book you mentioned, Mortimer, Rat Race to Space. And this is a book that has a lot of space in it, but it also has facts about science. So in this case, I went to NASA facilities. I went to Houston and I went to Cape Canaveral at Florida to watch a rocket launch and to learn about how the astronauts live in space and what they need to do to get there. So sometimes I get to do research in person, and that's a lot of fun too.
You started getting paid to write for a newspaper when you were just 12 years old.
12? That's crazy.
Don't worry, that still gives us 2 years. We are not behind yet.
Not yet.
Can you tell us about that?
You bet I can. Well, you're right. I started making books when I was about 8 or 9 years old. I started writing stories and poems and riddles and stapling pages and drawing pictures. And some of my books were jokes and riddles, and some of them were nonfiction. So I already had an interest in nonfiction at that age. But I didn't get paid for my writing, you're right, until I was 12 years old. And what happened is, at that time, the daily newspaper, which was called the Edmonton Journal, had a page just for kids. And I think newspapers everywhere should do this. Every Tuesday, they had one giant page just for kids. And it had content that kids would like to read. It was a place where I could find pen pals to write to. And one of the things I could do was enter a writing contest. So I wrote a poem. I mailed it in. I did not win the contest, but something good still happened. My name was in the newspaper and it said Joan Marie Galat, honorable mention. So it's like they were saying, good job, Joan, but you're not getting a prize. But because my name was in the paper, something else could happen. I got a letter from the editor, the person in charge of a different newspaper, a weekly newspaper, and it said, "Dear Joan, I see you're a writer and you live in Sherwood Park. Would you like to write for the newspaper? We'll pay you for it." And I thought, wow, last week I had a job delivering the paper and now I had a job writing for the newspaper. But I had a big problem. I needed an idea. What was I going to write about? Now, I'd heard people say, write about what you know, but I was 12 years old and I thought, what do I know? And then I thought of something I knew quite well, and that was my backyard. And in our backyard, we had a birdhouse, and there were tree swallows living in the birdhouse. And whenever I went near this birdhouse, these little tree swallows, they're not that big, they would attack me. They'd swoop and they'd dive bomb and try and scare me away. And I was careful. I didn't want to disturb the nest or have them desert their chicks or anything. So I was careful to stay away. But one day I could hear peep, peep, peep coming out of the birdhouse, and I dragged a chair over. I looked around. I couldn't see the parent birds anywhere. So I stepped up. I looked inside, and I saw the chicks with their great big beaks. And then the parent birds came out of nowhere and scared me away. They dive bombed at me again. And I realized I had a story. I had a setting, the backyard. I had characters, poor me, and these ferocious birds. And I had action. These birds were out to get me and they guard their young, as they should do. So I wrote a story and actually have a copy of it here. It's called The Tree Swallows. And that's the first time I got paid for my writing. But it was a weekly newspaper. So every week I had to come up with a new idea. And I thought, what am I going to do? And sometimes as writers, we get ideas from other things we read. And I had read an advice column in the newspaper where people would send in questions asking for advice about their personal lives, and someone would give them an answer. So I thought, well, why don't I have a question and answer column? Not advice about relationships, but what about birds? I'd had good luck with that already. So I asked people to send me questions about birds. And if I knew the answer, I could put it in the paper. And if I didn't know the answer, I could go to the library and look things up, or I could use my own collection of bird books because I like nature and wildlife. And I had a lot of bird books. And I could put things in my own words and answer people's questions. And so that's what I did. And that was my first paid writing job. It was lots of fun.
We are very excited about your next book, Make Your Mark, Make a Difference.
It does seem very different from your other books.
Can you tell us what inspired you to write that?
That's a great question. It is very different from my other books. Usually I'm writing about outer space, and now I'm writing about things here on Earth. And here's a copy of the cover of it. I've been working on the final proofread just today. I got interested in activism and about what you can do to make a difference, especially as a child. What can you do as a kid to make a difference? Because a long time ago, my youngest daughter was interested in child soldiers. She came home from school and she'd learned that kids as young as she was at that time were being handed guns and asked to fight. And it was just, it's an appalling thing. She was horrified. I was horrified. And she wanted to make a difference. She wanted to raise money, and she wanted to help kids get out of this predicament of being forced to fight. And I didn't really know how to help her. My advice was that she join an international organization that had child volunteers and maybe do some fundraising and help them that way. But she was very committed to the idea of doing it herself. And because she was so young, I realized that this would probably become my project. And I didn't see how I could take that on with my other responsibilities. So in the end, the idea kind of slipped away. But I never forgot about it. I always wished I'd found a way to help her. And maybe I should have tried harder to convince her that joining an organization that was already established would work, because I was worried about if we raised money and sent it off to one of these countries where there are child soldiers, how would we get the money to the right people? Who could we trust, and how would we know to do that? So it bugged me all these years. It bugged me, how could I have helped Amy? And so I ended up pitching the idea to a publisher for Make Your Mark, Make a Difference. And it's a book that includes all the way kids can help and what to do if you want to do it on your own, or what to watch out for if you want to join an organization. So sometimes ideas come from things that happened long ago, and we hold on to them and stay curious.
We have interviewed a number of authors who have had books banned in certain places, which is an issue very important to us.
That means in those places, kids don't have the same access to books that we have, and may not be able to see themselves represented in books.
Can you give us your feelings on this current trend?
Well, I'm glad that you're concerned with this as well, because I think it's a serious problem. I don't agree with book banning. I think kids can make the decisions about what books they are ready to read simply by picking up a book and deciding. And if those books aren't put in front of you, how can you understand what life was like before today? Because a lot of books have been around for a while. and they show a period of time and how life really was and how people commonly thought. And it's really important to be exposed to different ideas. We can't just read books on topics and from people that we agree with, or we're never going to learn anything new, or we're not going to have empathy if we can't understand what led people to behave in a certain way, whether we're talking about a banned book in fiction or nonfiction. So I'm really glad you raised that topic.
What writer has had the most influence on you?
That's a good question, but a tricky one to answer, because I think that the influence in my life from other authors has come from all the books that I've read. There was a period in my life as a child where I would ride my bike to the library, and in the summer I'd take home a backpack full of books and I'd read a book a day. And I don't remember all the titles or the authors, but each one influenced me in a different way. And so I can't really name a single one.
What advice do you have for young people who want to write nonfiction?
That's a great question. I think that if you want to write nonfiction, you should read nonfiction, and you should read current books, like the books that are coming out today, because they're very different from books that were released a long time ago. And a lot of, I don't think kids think this way, but I think sometimes adults think about nonfiction in the context of the books they read as very young children. And the evolution of books has changed so much. Nonfiction books educate you, but nonfiction books today are not trying so hard just to educate you. They're also trying to entertain you and to captivate you and to get you excited about things. And so if you want to be a writer, you need to read in the genre where you want to be published. And it's also good just to read widely, because some like nonfiction writers like myself, we take elements of fiction and put them in our nonfiction to also make our points. So we might use narrative storytelling. So I have a book. I'm going to pull it out of my pile here. I have this book called Dark Matters, Nature's Reaction to Light Pollution. And it's a book full of facts about how light at night, unwanted light, impacts wildlife. But it's also a book full of stories, and it's called a narrative nonfiction because I'm using stories and elements of storytelling to make the important points I want to make about how wildlife is impacted at night. So this book offers both entertainment and entertainment in the form of really interesting facts. So there are many reasons to read widely.
We talked about Make Your Mark, Make a Difference that comes out in February. Can you tell us about another project that you are working on now?
Yes, I have another book that will come out next year. It'll be in the fall of 2024, and it's about the topic of road ecology. Road ecology is how roads impact wildlife. Now, anyone who's driven in a car down a country road or down a highway, if you pay attention, you see roadkill. You see animals that are killed on the side of the road, and it's very disturbing. And so roads impact habitat because they separate. They might separate a breeding ground from a feeding ground for animals. And so animals have to crisscross these roads and they're getting hurt. And roads take away habitat. And there's a lot of interesting things about it. And a lot of interesting things people in different parts of the world are doing, like making crossings over top the road. There's squirrel bridges, there's fish tunnels, there's all kinds of things that engineers are figuring out ways to make a difference. So that's the book that I'll be working on as soon as I finish proofreading Make Your Mark, Make a Difference.
Finally, it's time for Turbo Tech.
10 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'll try.
Okay. Number 1, what is your favorite phrase to use?
Everything in moderation.
Number 2, what is one subject you'd love to learn more about?
Chocolate.
Number 3, what is your go-to snack food?
Chocolate.
Number 4, what was your favorite book growing up?
I really liked a book called My Side of the Mountain. It was about a boy who lived inside a tree.
Number 5, if you could teleport somewhere right now, where would you go?
Well, if I could be sure I would have oxygen, I think I would go to Mars.
Number 6, if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
I would like to fly. Definitely flying.
Number 7, what was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Bugs Bunny.
Number 8, what was your favorite rainy day activity?
Definitely reading. Love to read.
Number 9, if you could have any 3 dinner guests, who would they be?
Oh boy, 3 dinner guests. Well, I think I would like Abraham Lincoln, Ben Franklin, and I guess this can be someone living or not living. Yeah. Oh boy. I think I'll take George Washington.
Number 10.
What was the best piece of advice you were ever given?
Mm, that's a good one. What was the best piece of advice I was ever given? I think it would have been in writing that your first copy is always a rough copy and you always have to revise.
You were amazing. Thank you so much for doing that.
And thank you so much for spending this time with us.
We can't wait to read your future books.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed your interesting questions and it was great to spend this time with you.